Hello and welcome to this week's edition of iTorah. This week we read in the Torah the Parsha of Bahalotcha, which discusses the famous seven-branched candelabra which existed in the temple. Generally speaking, the candelabra is said to correspond to the Jewish people. Let me elaborate. The candelabra had 7 arms, and similarly also the Jewish people can broadly be divided into 7 categories. These correspond to the 7 divine attributes: Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. Briefly, there are those who serve God through kindness, others through discipline, others through the appreciation of beauty, others who are very good at execution, doing what they have to, others through humility. There are those who serve God through bonding, and finally, there are those with a regal bearing and who get things done by virtue of the strength of their regal character. Each one of these is a method of serving God. When it comes to the menorah, we're told that the menorah was made out of one piece of pure gold. It wasn't soldered together. You couldn't take one branch and solder it on to the stem from one side, another branch and solder it on to the stem from the other side. It wouldn't be kosher that way. It had to be miksha, one piece. And the meaning of this is that though there be many means of expressing oneself, expressing one's closeness to God, of acting out and reaching the greatest levels of one's own humanity, all of them are of one piece. No one is greater than the other, no one is smaller than the other. We all have our own way of expressing, each one of them which is equally valid. All of them miksha achas zahav tahor, one piece of pure gold. Another lesson can also be learned in terms of the Jewish soul's comparison to the candles from the method of the lighting. When it comes to the lighting of the menorah, the Torah doesn't say bahadlikcha et hanerot. You know, when you light the candles on Friday night, the bracha, the blessing is lahadlik ner shel Shabbat Kodesh, to light, to kindle the candle of the Holy Sabbath. However, that's not the expression which the Torah uses. The Torah uses the expression bahalotcha et hanerot, which means literally, if you lift up the candle. Now, simply said, Rashi explains that what this means is that there were steps in front of the menorah, by virtue of which the Kohen Gadol would stand up until he was on the level of the actual candles. But is there perhaps a lesson that we can learn in this, in terms of our lighting up of each other, of our fellow Jews? You know, every Jew's got a responsibility not only to himself, but as Jews we've got responsibility to those around us as well. We have to light their candle. Now, in the process of lighting their candle, often we find that the Jew is not behaving properly. And there could sometimes be a tendency to rebuke the person, to tell the person off, to discipline the person severely. The Torah therefore tells us, remember, every Jew is a candle. Ner Hashem nishmat Adam. The candle of God is the soul of man. When you light that candle, you have to lift him up first. Not just light him, bahalotcha, but lift him up first. This can be understood perhaps by means of a well-known Chassidic story, anecdote. They once went to one of the great Rebbes, and they said to him, look at this interesting thing. When you go into a schwitzbad, a sauna bath, schwitzbad in Yiddish. The custom in those days were, as it is in schwitzbads and sauna baths today, that there are different levels. Except the way it was in Russia in the old days, that it wasn't just that you went onto a bench, but you actually went into rooms, one room on a higher level than another room. The hottest room, and the room where a person would come out feeling, wow, it's so nice, was obviously the highest room. Now they had another custom in these sauna baths as well. When they got to the highest room, they would take these straw brooms and they would hit each other on the backs. And as they were hitting each other on the back, the person would say, "Oh, Machaya, it feels so good." So this Chassid asked the Rebbe, and he said to the Rebbe, "Look, an interesting thing. You go into a sauna bath, and people hit you, and you say, 'Oh, it's a Machaya, it's fantastic.' Imagine if a person would take a straw broom, and as you were walking down the street, he would hit you on the back. What would you do then? To say the least, you'd be very upset, you'd be very angry. So what's the difference?" So the Rebbe explained, if you lift the person from level to level first, if you warm him up, if you make him feel good about himself, then even if you hit him, even if you rebuke him later on, not only does he not throw the rebuke back onto your face, he actually appreciates it. And he says, "I'm Chaya. That was fantastic. Thank you." But first of all, you have to warm him up. First of all, you have to lift him up, take him to a higher level. And then he'll appreciate it. That's why it says, "Bahalotcha et hanerot." When you lift up the candles. Every human being is a candle. Every human being needs to be lit up. But if you want to light him up, don't go at him negatively at the outset. Don't tell him what he's doing wrong. Don't rebuke him. Lift him up. Warm him up. Make him feel good about himself. Then, when you rebuke him, he'll be more likely to accept the rebuke. One final lesson we can learn from the candles. As I said, it says, "Bahalotcha," when you raise up the candle, not when you light the candle. Rashi gives an alternate explanation. Rashi says, what it means is that when you light someone's candle, you can't just kindle it and move away. The flame won't hold. You have to stay with the person long enough for the flame to catch onto the wick, so that the person's wick will remain lit even after you move away. In other words, when teaching another person, when sharing with another person some Torah, the intention should never mean to make that person dependent on you. That without you, his candle constantly goes out. So he needs to keep on coming back to you for advice. You have a responsibility, bahalotcha, to cause his candle to stay alight by itself, to rise up on its own. That's why it says bahalotcha, to rise up on its own. Make that person independent. I wish you Shabbat Shalom. Until next week. This is iTorah signing off.